Well, hello. Welcome back to your youth videos. These are a little different than before, as you'll see, where we do a lot less talking, and this is more just an intro into your guys' night, a way for us to be able to give you some announcements, guide you through some stuff, and then lead you into the discussion that you're going to have. If you don't know who we are, I'm Aiden. I'm the youth pastor.
I'm Tiana. I'm the other youth pastor.
Yep. And we're here to tell you the things. So, Tiana, youth stuff.
Yes.
There's new things.
Yeah. So next week, you guys have your first offsite small group gathering. And if you were hanging out at our large group gathering, you probably heard a little bit about that. And so your small group leaders should already have a plan that they can communicate to you guys, which you guys gave some input in at the large group gathering. And so they're going to tell you what you guys are doing. And that's for next week on Wednesday and Thursday when you guys would normally meet. If you're on a Wednesday watching this, it'll be probably next Wednesday and Thursday and so on. So you're going to want to tell your parents to check their emails because they will have all the information in that email. And so we don't have to worry about remembering every little detail. Don't panic.
That's great. So hopefully your leaders know what you're doing, or else.
I mean, hopefully.
They
know at this point.
That's the hope. With that being said, why don't you guys go around your group, say your name, say your high of the week, say your low of the week. Go. So we are beginning a series in Mark. Mark is a book in the Bible, in the New Testament, which means it was written after Jesus died and rose again. And it's actually a biography about Jesus' life, written by a guy named John Mark, who appears multiple times throughout the New Testament, actually. When he first shows up, he's not very good. Where he abandons Paul on a missionary journey.
John Mark.
And then Paul and Barnabas are together and they're like, sweet, that missionary journey was really fun. Let's go on another one. And then Barnabas says, yeah, let me bring my nephew again, John Mark. And then Paul says, heck no, that guy left us. And so then John Mark splits up, probably the most epic discipleship team of all time. Oh. And Paul goes his own way. Barnabas goes his own way and takes John Mark.
His nephew?
Yeah.
That's a good uncle.
That's a good uncle. Either that or it's his cousin. I'm pretty confident it's his nephew, though.
Relative. It is a good relative.
A good relative. I'm pretty confident it's his nephew. And they go their separate ways. But John Mark, on that journey, he falls in love with Jesus, doesn't abandon Barnabas, actually becomes a disciple of Peter, who you might know, and you're going to meet in this book quite a bit. And because he becomes close to Peter, and eventually becomes close to Paul again, to the point where Paul in one of his letters says that John Mark has become like a son to him.
Whoa.
So it's a big turnaround.
Plot twist.
Big plot twist. But because he was so close with Peter, he actually wrote down Peter's account of what Jesus did when he was on earth.
Yeah, so I was going to say that I've always had it in my brain that the book of Mark is kind of like Peter's gospel.
It is.
Okay.
But not, But because Peter was a carpenter, well, no.
Wasn't he a fisherman?
Jesus was a carpenter. Because he was a fisherman. He was a trades kind of guy. He wasn't super educated. And back in that day, you didn't really know how to write unless you were someone who was heading into education. John Mark knew how to write. And so he took Peter's thoughts about the gospel and turned them into the very first gospel that was ever written.
That's awesome.
But this is a biography about Jesus' life and the good news that he has. And so to intro this for you guys, because if you as a leader have been paying attention, you're going to check your leader email, and in there you'll have the small group guide that'll have all the discussion questions and the verses you're reading, which is all of Mark chapter 1 today, that you guys will go through that after this video. But in order to prep you for that, we wanted to show you, as we will, with every single chapter of this series, some kind of intro video.
We're doing like a chapter every small group.
Every small group.
Okay, that's the plan. Just
doing a chapter. And so to intro each chapter, we'll have like a little video, a little snippet for you. And so for this week, we wanted to give you an overview of the book of Mark from the Bible Project, where they did a whole animation on it. So you're going to get a little spoiler alert as to what's coming in this book. But I feel like it's a good, helpful intro, because then you can kind of see the scope of this whole book, and then you get to look at all of its little pieces put together.
And pro tip, if you miss a small group, then you just know, hey, if you want to catch up, you can read that next chapter.
Yeah.
And then you'll be all caught up.
And you'll be set.
Yeah.
So
that's easy.
Enough rambling. Here's the video from the Bible Project. And then after it, you guys can begin going through that small group discussion guide.
We should remind small group leaders to do attendance.
Oh, yeah.
Do your check-in if you haven't done it.
Do your attendance.
And then watch this video.
And then watch the video.
The Gospel of Mark is a book in the Bible about the life of Jesus. And the earliest reliable tradition tells us that it was written by a guy named John Mark.
Now, Mark didn't just grab a bunch of random stories about Jesus and throw them together. He's designed this book to address some really specific questions about whether or not Jesus was the Jewish Messiah.
So let's stop right there, because that's a term a lot of people like me aren't very familiar with.
Yeah, so the Messiah was a royal figure, sometimes called the Son of God, that Israel was expecting to come and set up a kingdom here on earth. And around the time of Jesus, Israel was occupied by Rome, and so many Jews were hoping that the Messiah would come and overthrow the Romans and rule as king.
But Jesus didn't overthrow the Romans. In fact, he was killed by them.
And that brings us to the very issues Mark is trying to get at in this book. So in the first half, he focuses on who Jesus is. Is he really the Messiah? And then in the second half, he's addressing how Jesus became the Messianic king. And then right here in the middle of the book is this pivotal story that brings the two halves together, and Jesus answers both of these questions.
Okay, so let's talk about the first half of the book, who Jesus is.
So Mark makes his beliefs about Jesus very clear from the first line of the book. The beginning of the good news about Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God.
One of the next stories is Jesus getting baptized, and God's voice announces from heaven, "This is my son." So it couldn't be more clear. It's presenting Jesus as the Messiah.
Yes, but as you're reading through this first half of Mark, you'll notice something really interesting start to happen. Jesus is going about healing all these different people, and he's constantly telling them to keep quiet about who he is. This happens so many times in Mark's account, it's very strange.
Yeah, why keep it a secret?
So remember, lots of Jews had lots of different expectations about what the Messiah would be and do. And so Jesus doesn't want people to misunderstand what it means for him to be Israel's Messiah. And so with all that in mind, we come now to the pivotal story at the center of the book, where Jesus takes his disciples away and he asks them, "Who do you all say that I am?"
And Peter says what everyone's been saying, "You're the Messiah, the Son of God."
But then something new happens, because Jesus starts explaining to them how he's going to become the Messianic king, and it is not what they expected. He says he's going to suffer and die and rule by becoming a servant, or in his words, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to become a servant and to give his life as a ransom for many.
Peter is startled by this and he rebukes Jesus because there's no way he's going to let Jesus die. And Jesus responds, "Get behind me, Satan," which is really intense.
It really is. But it highlights how important it is for Jesus that his disciples come to understand who he really is. And so here, now in this pivotal section, Jesus tries 3 different times to have this conversation with them, and every time they respond in confusion and even fear.
Okay, so this launches us into the second half of the book, where Mark addresses the question of how Jesus becomes the Messianic king. It's the last week of Jesus' life. He goes to Jerusalem, gets in conflict with the religious leaders, and gets arrested.
And he's put on trial as someone who's claiming to be the king of the Jews. He's even given a crown and a purple robe like a king would get, but it is all a cruel joke.
Then he's mocked and beaten and hung up on a cross where he dies.
And it's here in this crucial scene that we meet a new character,
A Roman soldier.
who suddenly gets everything that's going on.
He says, "Surely this is the Son of God."
Which is crazy. It's an enemy who's first putting it all together that Israel's messianic king is the crucified Jesus.
That's the structure of the book of Mark. But the book doesn't end with Jesus dead on the cross.
No. So on the third day, some women go to visit Jesus' tomb, only to find that it's empty. And then there's this angel standing there, instructing them to go and tell this good news that Jesus is alive from the dead. But instead, they run away and they don't tell anyone because they're afraid, and that's how the book ends.
Which is a really abrupt ending.
Yeah, it's so abrupt that later scribes did add an ending that brings more closure to the story. And you'll find that story in your Bible with a little footnote that says it was added much later. But Mark's a brilliant storyteller, and he's intentionally ended this book abruptly. So all through the book, the disciples have been confused about Jesus' plan to give up his life, the story in the middle, and now right here at the end. It's like Mark is acknowledging just how startling this claim really is. And he wants you, the reader, to wrestle with it for yourself. Is this crucified Jesus really the Messiah that they've been waiting for?